Howdy, folks. Saddle up and gather around the campfire for another dust-choked adventure from NDM Wild West, where we unearth the raw, untamed stories of the frontier that Hollywood wishes it could capture in celluloid glory. If you're craving tales of lonesome trails, six-shooters singing in the wind, and hearts forged in the crucible of the Badlands, you've struck gold. Today's yarn is a heart-pounding epic of a solitary soul shattered by loss only to find redemption in the fiery spirit of a woman the world tried to break. Set against the jagged canyons and relentless sun of the American Southwest, this saga will have you on the edge of your seat like a showdown at high noon. Before we dive into the grit and glory, hit that like button if you're ready for a ride through the wilds. Drop a comment, sharing your favorite Western hero or villain, and share this with your trail partners. Let's fan the flames of these frontier legends far and wide. Now tighten your cinch and hold on tight as we gallop into the story of Jack Harlan, the lone rancher who bought the last Navajo spirit left behind. Jack Harlan guided his battle-scarred horse team down the bone-dry main street of Silver Ridge, a forsaken speck on the map where the Arizona Territory met the edge of oblivion. The town was a ramshackle collection of adobe saloons, weathered mercantiles, and false-fronted gambling dens, all baked under a merciless sun that turned the red earth into a furnace. Dust devils swirled like restless ghosts, and the air carried the sharp tang of sagebrush, mixed with the acrid smoke from blacksmith forges. Jack's duster coat hung heavy with the crimson grit of the trail, his beard a wild, unkempt thicket that spoke of months without a barber's blade, and his eyes cold steel gray from years of squinting into blinding horizons and dodging the shadows of his past swept over the scene without a flicker of interest. He wasn't here for the bawdy laughter spilling from the swinging doors of the Rusty Spur Saloon or the haggling over horseflesh at the livery. No, sir. Jack rode in for essentials, sacks of salt for the cattle, black powder for his old Colt revolver, fresh lantern wicks to chase away the night, rolls of barbed wire to mend his sagging fences, and a new grindstone, 'cause the old one had cracked like a brittle promise under the weight of endless toil. In and out, that was the plan. No lingering, no idle chin-wagging. The last time he let the sun dip low in Silver Ridge, a pack of whiskey-fueled cowboys had cornered him in the saloon, dredging up the bloody ghosts of the war between the states. They'd prodded at his role as a Union scout, the ambushes he'd laid, the lives snuffed out in the name of a fractured nation. Jack had gone stone silent, his jaw locked tighter than a bear trap, and stormed out into the night, leaving behind a trail of unspoken regrets. Words couldn't resurrect the dead or wash the blood from his hands. His wife Eliza had been cold in the ground for nigh on 12 years, her grave a solitary mound on a wind-scoured knoll. Behind his cabin, marked by a cross he'd hewn from juniper wood with blistered palms and a heavy heart. The ranch, once a thriving spread of scrubby pastures and hardy longhorns, was now a shadow of itself. Fences leaning like drunken gamblers, the well running low in dry spells, and the barn creaking under the assault of relentless winds. But it endured just like Jack. That was his solemn vow. Keep the land breathing, patch the wire before coyotes slip through rustle-up beans and hardtack to stave off hunger, and push the days forward in a relentless march, one boot heel at a time, ignoring the hollow ache that echoed through his chest like a distant thunder. He'd have made a beeline for the mercantile, loading his buckboard with supplies and hightailing it back to solitude if not for the clamor erupting from the old corral yard at the town's edge. A throng of men, roughneck miners, trail-hardened cowboys, and shifty-eyed traders clustered thick as flies on a carcass, their voices a raucous mix of jeers, laughter, and spitting tobacco. Some leaned on fence rails, hats tipped low against the sun. Others paced with that idle menace born of boredom in a lawless land. Jack didn't pull reins, 'cause curiosity tugged him. The path narrowed with bodies forcing his team to slow, and snatches of words cut through the din like knife blades. Auction. Last savage left. Worthless squaw. Break her or bury her. His knuckles whitened on the leather reins, a muscle twitching in his jaw, before he set the brake with a gritty squeak and swung down from the seat boots, hitting the parched dirt with a puff of red dust. He pushed through the crowd, shouldering past sweat-soaked shirts and holstered irons until he saw her. Chained to a gnarled hitching post, like a wild Mustang, awaiting the brand, her wrists chafed bloody from the rusty irons that bit into her copper skin. She stood unbowed, spine straight as an arrow shaft, chin level, and defiant eyes dark as obsidian pools fixed on some distant point beyond the leering faces, as if she'd mastered the art of seeing through men's cruelty rather than confronting it head-on. Her buckskin dress, once a masterpiece of Navajo craftsmanship, with intricate fringes, turquoise beads, and eagle feathers sewn with care, was now torn and filthy, the neckline ripped low to expose the graceful curve of her cleavage and the sun-warmed swell of her bosom. No attempt at modesty, the fabric was too tattered and pride had long since replaced shame in her arsenal. Her skin glowed like burnished canyon rock muscles, taut in her bare arms and calves from a lifetime of traversing mesas, herding sheep, and defying the elements. She was young, perhaps 25 summers, her raven hair a wild cascade, part braided in traditional twists, part loose from rough handling and relentless winds. The men had been poking at her like a sideshow oddity, their taunts bouncing off her like bullets off a cliff face. But she offered nothing in return, no tears, no snarls, just an impenetrable calm that unnerved them more than any outburst. "She ain't spoken a lick," a bow-legged prospector grumbled nearby, chewing on a wad of chaw, without glancing at Jack, just broadcast into the wind. 4 days straight. The other captives went quick traded for whiskey or worse. Not this one. Won't kneel, won't whimper, just stands there like she's queen of the damn desert. He spat a brown stream into the dirt. Folks reckon she's cursed by them Navajo spirits or just too stubborn to break. Either way, she's bad luck walking. Jack's jaw worked, silently grinding like millstones. He didn't respond, didn't need to. He stepped closer, boots crunching gravel, the crowd parting slight as if sensing the storm brewing in his silence. Her eyes shifted, then locking onto him, with a predator's precision. No beg for mercy, no flicker of hope, just a swift appraisal weighing him as threat or something else. He recognized that gaze. It had mirrored his own in the cracked looking glass after the war, when nightmares rode him harder than any bronco, and the world felt like a noose tightening slow. He could walk away, load his supplies, vanish into the Badlands, and pretend her face didn't haunt him. Ride home to mend fences, oil his lantern, stare into the fire, till embers died, then climb the knoll on Sunday to murmur to Eliza's ghost that the world spun on unchanged. But leaving her here, that'd mean some saddle tramp with a fat poke and fouler intentions would drag her off into the night, and the horrors awaiting were as certain as a hangman's dawn. Jack's hand delved into his vest pocket, fingers closing around the folded bills he'd counted meticulously that morning, his entire stake from selling a few scrawny steers. He strode to the auctioneer, a slick-talking varmint in a derby hat and stained vest, who eyed him with surprise. "How much for her?" Jack rasped, voice gravelly from months of solitary muttering to his horses. The man blinked, caught flat-footed by the sudden bid on what he deemed unsellable. He named a price low enough because she'd lingered like bad news high enough to gouge a desperate fool. Jack didn't haggle, didn't flinch. He slapped the greenbacks into the outstretched palm, the paper crinkling like dry leaves. The auctioneer shrugged, bent to unlock the chains with a rusty key, the metal clanking free. "Want a bill of sale, stranger? Make it official like." "Ain't necessary," Jack muttered. The irons thudded to the dirt, kicking up a small cloud. She didn't rub her wrists, didn't wince at the fresh air on raw flesh. She stood stock still till Jack turned on his heel and headed back to the buckboard. Then with the grace of a mountain lion, she followed, not because she trusted him, but because the alternatives were bleaker, each path a thorny arroyo leading to ruin. Jack didn't touch her, didn't guide or glance back. He climbed aboard, flicked the reins. She hoisted herself up, perching on the hard plank seat, hands folded in her lap like clasped prayer shoulders, squared against whatever storm brewed next. She stole a quick look at his weathered duster, then averted her eyes to the vast, unforgiving horizon. He sensed the chill creeping in from the northern ridges, a harbinger of early winter winds howling down from the mountains. Her torn dress offered scant protection against the bite. It had flapped like a tattered flag in the gusts. Without a word, Jack shrugged off his heavy coat, holding it out like an offering. She stared at it, then at him, searching for the trap, the hidden barb. Finally, she took it, draping it over her legs without donning it fully, as if accepting warmth but not obligation. They rolled out of Silver Ridge, the town's cacophony fading to a distant murmur, the clink of spurs, the whinny of horses, the bark of a far-off dog. The buckboard creaked over ruts carved by countless wagons, the horses' hooves kicking up red plumes that danced in their wake. Miles stretched silent, the landscape a tapestry of mesas rising like ancient sentinels dotted with twisted pinyon pines and the occasional flash of a roadrunner darting across the trail. Jack's mind wandered to the ranch, the north fence sagging under monsoon rains. The hayloft near, empty, the corral gate swinging loose on one hinge, winter closing in like a posse on the hunt. He glanced once at her wrists, the skin angry and weeping. She caught the look, but her face remained impassive, a mask carved from the canyon stone. He wondered how long she'd wandered this brutal world, holding that stoic front against the tempests of men and fate. Her name whispered in the quiet recesses of her mind, and later shared in halting words, was Nizhoni, a Navajo word meaning beautiful, though beauty had been a curse in her world. Snatched in a brutal raid on her clan's remote hogan, dragged through thorn-choked arroyos and sun-scorched flats, her tongue silenced by captors, who mocked her defiance, she'd been paraded and prodded like livestock. Unsold for days, 'cause her unyielding pride turned buyers away. They wanted broken spirits, not flames that could scorch him back. Her creed now endure without surrendering the core of her soul. No kneeling to conquerors, no begging for scraps of mercy from empty hearts. Survival as resistance, that thin, unbreakable thread woven through her being. Jack's own code had been etched in blood and lost for years. Tend the ranch like a sacred duty stay useful enough to justify drawing breath. Remember Eliza without letting grief consume him like wildfire. Buying Nizhoni hadn't figured in that ledger, and he grappled with the implications as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of blood and gold. But deep down, he knew she wasn't chattel to him. The cabin had room for another soul, and the echo and emptiness there had grown too vast, too suffocating, like a canyon closing in. Dusk cloaked the Badlands in a fiery mantle when they crested the final rise to the ranch. The spread sprawled modest, a weathered cabin of adobe and log smoke curling lazy from the chimney fences, stretching into the gloom like skeletal fingers. Pastures thin with drought-stricken grass, the barn, a hulking shadow with doors that groaned in the wind. Longhorns low distant in the corral, and a lone owl hooted from a gnarled cottonwood. Jack pulled the team to a halt by the stone-ringed well, swung down with a grunt. Nizhoni waited eyes, tracking every move, hands on reins. Boots on ground, the subtle shift of his holstered revolver. He extended a calloused hand to help her descend. She ignored it, stepping down, graceful but wary. Her bare feet hitting the packed earth with a suppressed wince as sharp pebbles dug into tender soles, the pain fleeting across her features before vanishing like mist. He pushed open the cabin door, the hinges squeaking like a warning, and stepped aside, gesturing her in first so she could survey the territory without him looming behind. The interior was sparse, lit by the dying embers in the iron stove. One main room with a half wall of stacked stones dividing it into vague sections. A rough-hewn table scarred from years of meals, eaten alone, the stove leaking faint smoke from a cracked flue shelves holding tins of beans and a few dog-eared books. Two beds his, a sturdy frame with a wool blanket, and a lower one he'd built when Eliza's fever made climbing impossible. He nodded toward the small bed. That one's yours if it suits. He didn't lay down laws, no talk of bolted doors at night, no list of chores to earn her keep, no boundaries carved in stone. Ownership didn't grant him the right to dictate. He sensed she'd had enough of that. Nizhoni stood threshold still, taking it all in the stove's glow, casting long shadows. The faint scent of pine resin and gun oil. The window shuddered against night prowlers. The lingering trace of a woman's lavender soap on faded linens Jack couldn't bear to discard. Her gaze lingered on a plain gold ring resting on the table unworn, but polished, a silent sentinel of loss. Jack followed her eyes, then slipped it into his pocket with a quiet rustle, no explanation offered. "I'll fix supper," he said, voice low and even. "Basin's there for washing. Water's clean from the well." He ladled thick bean stew simmered with chunks of salted venison and wild onions into two dented tin bowls, placing one on the small bed's edge, and taking his to the table, giving her wide berth to choose her ground. She opted for the floor by the hearth legs, crossed Indian style. His duster draped over her lap, eyes locked on the dancing flames as if drawing strength from their flicker. Jack ate methodical, the scrape of spoons, the only sound breaking the heavy quiet, not hostile, just pregnant with unspoken histories. He pondered the morrow dawn chores, waiting fences to ride and men wood to chop before the cold deepened. Would she join or retreat? He recalled the townies' sneers labeling her worthless when they meant unbreakable, a spirit too fierce for their chains. Bowls emptied, he rose to wash them in the basin, the water sloshing soft, then set them to dry on the shelf. He unfolded extra blankets, one draped at her bed's foot, another on a nearby chair if the floor felt safer. Glancing at a stack of spare planks and burlap sacks leaning against the wall, he mentally sketched a proper room divider for a come morn, granting her privacy without her having to voice the need. Night descended swift as a hawk's dive, the canyons outside plunging into inky black stars, punching through like diamond spurs. Jack banked the fire, reducing it to a low glow, and doused the lantern with a puff, plunging the cabin into ember-lit twilight. She lay on the low bed, eyes open to the rafters. He stretched on his, staring at the beams. He'd felled himself counting knots in the wood as a ritual to court sleep when it eluded him. Her breath steadied but remained shallow. She feigned rest, same as him. Both attuned to the stove's faint pops, the distant yip of coyotes hunting under the moon, the subtle shift of each other's presence in the shared space. Jack's thoughts drifted to Eliza's knoll, the wind-whipped mound. Buoyed mound where wildflowers bloomed defiant in spring. Come Sunday, he'd climb it hat in hand and confess the truth. Brought her home 'cause leaving her to those wolves felt like abandoning you all over again, and I ain't got the strength for that regret twice. Guilt surged like a flash flood, but he let it flow and ebb, refusing to let it drown him. Nizhoni lay rigid, heart-pounding at every creak of the cabin, settling the stranger's scent, stirring memories of rough hands and darker nights. Yet he'd offered no violence, no demands, just shelter, warmth, space. She'd stay awake, ears pricked for any approach. He didn't stir. Hours crawled by the fire, settling to coals, cold, seeping through cracks in the walls like whispering ghosts. Neither slumbered deep, neither bolted into the night. For now, surviving the first shared darkness without betrayal was triumph enough. Stay put. Inflict no harm. Carve out a livable nook in this harsh world. Test if trust could sprout from barren soil, unforced and true. Morning cracked with a vengeance, wind howling through the canyons like a banshee's wail, rattling the tin roof and stirring the embers in the stove to faint pops. Jack roused first, sitting up slow, his joints creaking, protest from years of hard riding and harder falls. He glanced across the room. Nizhoni curled tight on the bed, his duster pulled high round her knees. Eyes shut, but brow furrowed in that telltale sign of uneasy rest, the kind that came from nights spent with one ear open for danger. He moved whisper quiet, slipping into his shirt and pants, lacing boots with practiced efficiency, then stoking the fire to chase the chill. Water set to boil on the stove, he stepped outside into the bite of dawn, the air crisp and laden with the scent of creosote bush after a night dew. The ranch stretched under a pale sky, mesas looming like silent guardians' pastures, a patchwork of yellowed grass and rocky outcrops. He broke the thin ice on the trough with his boot heel, the crack echoing sharp, then filled buckets from the well, the rope groaning on the pulley. Chores unfolded in familiar rhythm. Oats scattered for the horses who nickered, grateful in the corral. Corn for the scraggly hens pecking at the dirt. A quick scout of the lean-to where that dang hinge still dangled loose, threatening to let predators in. Everything held as he'd left it, tired, battered, but unyielding. But now faint footprints marked the dirt path to the cabin, smaller barefoot, a new imprint on his solitary world. Returning inside, the warmth greeted him like an old friend. Nizhoni was awake, sitting bolt upright, hair curtaining one side of her face, the duster still her shield. Her dress peeked beneath, torn and revealing, but she made no move to hide. Jack glanced brief, then away, respect, not revulsion. She hadn't disturbed a thing, hands folded neat in her lap. Brewed coffee, he said, pouring a steam-rising mug and setting it near her bed. Black as tar, no sugar to soften it. She eyed the mug where he didn't reach. He didn't press, taking his own to the table to sipping, despite the scald wincing faint. Words hung unsaid. He figured English might not flow easy for her, if at all, but some truths transcended tongue. Heading out to fix the north fence today. Sections down by the dry wash after that last flash flood. Then the corral gate needs straightening. Tools in the barn if you're of a mind to use them. Silence. Just a slow, deliberate blink, her dark eyes unreadable. Stay put if you prefer, or tag along, ain't my say. He didn't proclaim her free, such words rang hollow from men who'd promised the moon and delivered chains. He just laid the cards face up plain as day. She rose, eventual stretching with a quiet stiffness that spoke of days bound and beaten, her bare feet testing the floorboards hesitant. Jack noted the redness on her soles crisscrossed with cuts from the trail. He crossed to a dusty shelf, pulling down a pair of soft moccasins, Eliza's attempt at leatherwork never quite finished, and laid them by her bed. Might fit your stride. If not, I'll stitch 'em right. She looked down at him, then up at him, giving the faintest nod, no gushing thanks, but a spark of recognition. It sufficed. Jack headed out the door, creaking shut behind. By the time he'd hiked to the north fence, tools slung over shoulder, she trailed at a distance, the duster wrapped tight moccasins on her feet, hair braided back in a single thick rope that swung like a pendulum. No questions asked, she observed his work, the drive of posts into stubborn iron earth, the twist of wire around braces, the hammer's rhythmic thud. An hour in, without fanfare, she hefted a spare post, joining the labor. Her hands were rough-hewn, capable movements, efficient, as if she'd mended barriers against the world her whole life. They toiled in companionable silence, the wind whipping dust devils round their boots, the sun climbing high and beaten down like a blacksmith's hammer. When her mallet splintered on a rock-hard post, he passed her his without word. She accepted, swung on with renewed vigor. Rest came midday, perched on a fallen log, sharing water from his canteen. He offered first. She drank measured sips, eyes scanning the horizon for threats unseen, then handed it back. Afternoon dragged, but the fence rose stronger, a bulwark against the wilds. Back at the cabin, as shadows lengthened, Jack took to splitting logs behind the barn, the axe biting deep with each swing, sweat soaking his shirt. Nizhoni vanished, brief re-emerging with wire and a bent nail from the tool shed, kneeling by the corral to fiddle the hinge herself. Her fingers worked deft, twisting and hammering, till it hung true. Jack paused mid-swing, watching her quiet determination, but said nothing, respecting silence. That night, supper was sparse but filling, salt, pork-fried crisp biscuits baked golden in the stove. She ate little, chewing slow, as if relearning the act, her eyes flicking to him, often not suspicious now, but assessing. Jack cleared the table, lit the oil lamp with a match's hiss, its flame casting warm glows and long shadows. He fetched wood and nails, measuring space near her bed for the divider. Hammering slow to not startle, he built steady. She sat nearby, knees drawn up, watching. Then her voice cut the quiet, soft, cracked from disuse, accented but clear. Why? He paused, nail between teeth. Why'd you take me? He set the hammer down, met her gaze, steady eyes, tired but honest. 'Cause no one else should have had the chance. And 'cause there's room here for more than ghosts. She stared long, then lowered her eyes to the floor. I don't want to be owned. Not your wife, not your slave. Ain't aiming for that. You're free as the wind. She nodded once, sharp and final, the deal struck in that sparse exchange. That was enough for the night. Later, she chose the floor again, over the bed blanket, near the stove's warmth. He didn't argue, sensing the bed felt too vulnerable, too permanent. Trust was a slow burn, like kindling catching flame. Outside, coyotes howled a mournful chorus under a sliver moon. Inside, the fire crackled, soft, spreading heat across the planks. Jack glanced over before dousing the lamp. Her eyes still open, fixed on the rafters. Not fearful, just vigilant, and she hadn't run. That was a start, a fragile bridge across the chasm. Dawn arrived, frost-kissed, ice in the window panes in delicate patterns, the fire reduced to a low glowing heart in the hearth. Jack stirred early, sliding from bed, and practiced, hushed, glancing across, Nizhoni still on the floor. Blanket, cocoon, one hand tucked beneath her head, the other resting light over her chest like guarding a secret. Her breathing was even, peaceful in a way that tugged at something deep in him. He dressed swift, stepping out to face the cold snap, breaking trough ice again, hauling water, tending to the stock, with the rhythm of a man who'd made peace with routine. Inside, once more, she was up, standing by the window, arms crossed tight, duster arms like armor. She tensed, slight at his entry, body coiled as if expecting the world to shift, treacherous. He set the buckets down. Hot water's on. Wash up if it calls to you. She nodded, stepped aside. He turned his back, given privacy, busied with frying pork and grinding coffee beans, the aroma filling the cabin like a bomb. She scrubbed, deliberate, using a scrap of cloth and the steam rising water cleansing days of grime. When done, she returned the basin hair, damp and combed back, cheeks flushed, shoulders less rigid, a subtle thaw. They ate at the table, this time side by side, not speaking but sharing the space without strain. She watched him between bites, the way he held his fork, steady, chewed methodical, a man who'd learned patience the hard way. After he pointed toward the barn, clear in the south pen today, scrap wood piling up and snows whispering early this year from the peaks. I'll come, she said, voice firmer, surprising him with its resolve. He handed her work gloves, thick leather, worn but sturdy. She slipped them on without fuss. The day unfolded in the yard behind the barn, hauling broken timbers and rusted wire, sorting what could be salvaged from what was lost. Nizhoni lugged loads with grim determination, her raw hands grimacing occasional, but voiceless in complaint. Midday break on the log again, sharing jerky and bread, the wind picking up, carrying the scent of distant rain. She pulled the duster tighter. You ever work a ranch like this before? He asked, breaking the quiet. She paused, chewing slow. My father kept goats in the canyons, not cattle, but the labor's kin, fixed fences against wolves and storms. He nodded, approving. It shows in your hands. She glanced at him, then at her palms. Why do you live so alone? No kin, no hands. Jack shifted on the log, the question probing like a thorn. Wife passed long ago. Fever took her quick. No children to carry on. Kin scattered after the war. Her face softened, imperceptible. You had young ones, none that lived. She nodded as if piecing a puzzle. They sold me 'cause I wouldn't bend, wouldn't be quiet when they demanded silence. Too much fire, they said. He didn't reply immediate, just watched her profile against the ridgeline. No self-pity in her tone, just fact laid bare so it wouldn't fester. You don't gotta douse that fire here, he said. Speak your mind, even if it's against me. She met his eyes long and hard. Even if I curse the day you bought me, even then, words ain't chains. That night, she chose the bed over the floor, a small surrender to comfort. He noticed as he banked the fire, her blankets pulled tight, arm curled under cheek, face more at ease. He didn't comment come morn, but left the folded shirt by her bed, Eliza's cotton soft and never worn. Nizhoni held it to her chest, then laid it aside for now. The following day, she donned it over her dress sleeves, rolled, joining him to mend the hen coop, gather eggs in a basket, sweep the cabin, while he rode the pastures checking for strays. Dusk found her at the door, staring west toward the setting sun, painting the mesas in crimson. Jack approached quiet from behind. Looking for signs, kin perhaps. Sometimes I dream I'll see him, a sister, a scout from the old ways. But the horizon stays empty. I search too, he admitted, every Sunday at the knoll. She turned, brows drawn. For what? For peace, for her. They stood in the doorway as the sun bled out, side by side, not touching, but the gap narrower, the silence less vast. Days blurred into a tentative rhythm, no earthquakes, but subtle shifts like sand dunes reshaping under wind. Silence remained, but it warmed less a barrier than a blanket. Nizhoni no longer kept her back to him when moving through the cabin. Her flinches at sudden sounds faded like echoes. She took to tidy and unbidden, stacking firewood in neat cords, brushing down the horses' coats until they gleamed, mending torn blankets with needle and thread from the shelf. Not as a servant bowing low, not as a guest tiptoeing, but as someone who decided for the moment to root. She wore the shirt regular, now loose over her buckskin dress, the fabric hugging her curves, soft sleeves too long, but rolled practical. The dress still tore low at the neck fringes, frayed cleavage flashing when she bent to tasks. Jack caught himself noticing once a fleeting glance, then forced his eyes to the floor. Heat rising not from desire, but something deeper, a stirring of life long dormant. She seemed oblivious or perhaps indifferent, the tension between them not lustful, but weighted, built from shared labors and unspoken understandings. On a blistering Thursday, they rode out to the far field, tools packed on horseback, the sun hammering down like judgment. Fences there had buckled under a summer flash, flood wires tangled like snakes. Nizhoni worked beside him, sleeves up, sweat beading on her brow and trailing down her neck, glistening on exposed skin. He offered the canteen often. She drank without hesitation, now trust in small gestures. Midway through the afternoon, as they braced to post, she asked sudden, "What happened to her? Your wife? The fever? How did it take her?" Jack paused hammer mid-swing, leaning back against the fence, wiping sweat with his sleeve. The question hung heavy in the dry air. Came on sudden one spring, coffin burning up weak as a newborn foal, lasted 6 days of hell, buried her on the knoll under that big cottonwood. No family to help, none that stuck around. War scattered them. She looked toward the distant tree line, eyes distant. My tribe, they likely think me gone to the spirits, or wish it so. I refused a marriage arranged, dishonored my father's word. When the raid hit, no one came searching the trails. The confession hung between them, raw as an open wound. Jack didn't press for more. It was enough she'd shared. When they returned at dusk, dust-caked and bone-weary, Nizhoni washed at the basin while Jack stirred stew, the aroma of onions and meat filling the air. He caught her reflection in the window glass, hair loose, now fallen in waves, collarbone, stark scars faint on her arms from chains past her body, strong and unbowed. The wariness had ebbed, her movements fluid at home. After dinner, she sat by the fire cross-legged, eyes half-lidded in contemplation. Jack took the chair behind, mending a leather strap with slow stitches. The flames crackled, sparks dancing up the flue. Time stretched before she spoke again. "I don't know my place here. Not wife, not captive, not of my people anymore. I wake, work, eat, but what am I becoming?" He set the strap down, leaning forward, elbows on knees. "You're someone who's still on her feet after the world's tried to knock you down. That's rarer than gold in these parts." She turned, expression a mix of doubt and something softer. "And you, what are you now?" "Tired to the bone," he admitted, "but trying to build instead of just endure." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile, a crack in the armor. Later, as shadows lengthened, she shifted closer, sitting on the floor near his chair, their knees near brushing. Jack held still, heart thudding, slow but heavy. She placed her hand over his palm, warm against knuckles, scarred from fights and falls. He looked down at their joined hands, then at her face open, choosing. He didn't pull away. That night she touched his arm as he passed to bed, a light brush laden with meaning, thanks, or invitation, or both. Jack lay awake longer, listening to the cabin's breaths, her even rhythm across the room. For the first time in years, the silence felt full, promising. Snow arrived unannounced, a thin flurry at dawn, swelling to a steady veil by midday, blanketing the ridges in white and muting the world to stillness. Jack stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching drifts soften the fence lines, the wind howling like lost souls through the canyons. Inside, Nizhoni stoked the fire, sleeves rolled, hair braided tight, moving with a purpose that had become part of the ranch's pulse. She handed him a mug of hot broth without word as he stamped snow from his boots. He nodded, grateful, their routines interwoven like threads in a Navajo blanket. He hauled wood twice daily, chopping till his arms burned. She boiled stews, patched leaks in the roof with mud, and tar mended gear by the window as storms raged. Touches grew frequent, a hand on shoulder, passing eyes locking over meals. Not romance of ballads, but something quieter forged in shared trials. Evenings storm battering the walls, Nizhoni pulled her bedding nearer the hearth. Her shirt gaped slight in the heat, skin flushed curves lit by firelight. "Never asked where you learned fencing," he said. "Grandfather said if you could mend a barrier, you could hold life together, animals, people, spirits." He sipped broth. "Why no town, no preacher's words? Nothing calls me there. Town changes nothing." "But I did." She tilted head. "They whisper you're mad from the war. Lost pieces in the fighting? Ain't madness just the cost?" She nodded, moved closer, sitting at his feet. "Silence was my cage after the raid. No words but commands. I went mute to survive. Here silence is sanctuary." She looked long, then stood, placed hand on his chest over heart. "Sure," he whispered. "I chose to stay." She leaned in, lips meeting, soft, a spark igniting. He let her lead the kiss, real, chosen. She pulled back to her bed. Jack sat vigil by the fire, the warmth in his chest rivaling the flames. Snow isolated the ranch, a white fortress. Jack chopped. Nizhoni hummed old songs, bed closer nightly. One eve, lamp dim, she sat across, shirt loose. Was she beautiful? Yes, strong in quiet ways, stayed when others fled. You still mourn. Sundays, but less now, like letting her spirit rest. She stoked fire, shirt open. If I stay beyond winter, you are. She sat beside hand on leg. Night she crossed to his bed. No debt, he said. No. They lay close kisses, deeper hands exploring slow. Shirt fell bodies joined quiet, steady a union of survivors. After he held her sleep dreamless. Morn light soft. Didn't leave. Ain't planning. No man stayed after. Ain't them. Breakfast, she asked, leave this land. Thought on it, not now. 'Cause me. 'Cause found anchor. She hummed inside presence solid. Night found ring. This. Waited for new meaning. I'm not her. Don't need to be. She closed fingers round it. Night curled into him. Snow thawed March mud soft. Nizhoni planted herbs belly hinting. Staring. No. Cabin changed shelf, hers cradle carved. Jack visited no less. Nizhoni laid stone there. Berry ring when babe comes, she said. Together. April rider alone. Wife. Heard about Navajo. She stayed. Lucky me. Night she sharpened knife fire dancing on skin. Talk always. Don't care. Tell of her. Eliza. Tidy laughed loud. Love same? No, new way. She kissed leaned, ring boxed. Spring bloomed. On porch hand on belly. Future. You in it. Stayed, built, lived. And that's the legend, folks, of Jack and Nizhoni. Mercy sparking redemption in the West Heart. If it stirred your soul like a gunslinger's draw, like comment, your twist, share. Thanks for the ride. Stay wild.